You know, it's a strange thing, isn't it? How can two smart, well-intentioned people look at the exact same set of facts and come to completely opposite conclusions? Well, today, we're going to get into exactly that. We're going to explore how our own minds work, using the really intense debate around capitalism as a case study for why, so often, we end up seeing exactly what we already believe to be true.
And it all really comes down to this one huge, seemingly contradictory question. Is capitalism a giant machine that just creates poverty, or is it actually the most powerful tool we've ever had for curing it? The very fact that people can argue both sides so passionately, well, that's the puzzle we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so let's just lay it out. On one side, you've got the story that capitalism is basically a poverty machine. The idea is that any growth it creates only benefits the rich, and it does so at the direct expense of the poor. But then, on the complete other side, you have the argument that it's a prosperity engine, that it's lifted more people out of pure desperation than anything else in all of human history. Now, logically, these two things can't both be the whole truth. So, what is actually going on here?
To figure this out, we actually have to step away from economics for a second and look into psychology. Because the key isn't just in the numbers themselves, but in how our brains are wired to see those numbers. We're about to introduce a powerful mental shortcut that every single one of us uses, and it's called confirmation bias.
So what in the world is confirmation bias? Well, think of it like this. It's our brain's natural impulse to go on a hunt for proof that we're already right. It's a shortcut, to help us make sense of a really complex world without having to second-guess everything we believe all the time. It's super efficient, but man, it can create some absolutely massive blind spots.
And here's how it gets you. It works in three really subtle but powerful stages. First up is selective exposure. We just naturally drift towards news sources, websites, and even friends who already agree with us. Then comes biased interpretation. When we see a piece of evidence that's kind of vague, we'll bend it to fit our side of the story. And finally, there's biased memory. We simply find it easier to remember the facts and anecdotes that support what we already think. See? It's a loop that just keeps feeding itself.
All right, so that's the theory, but let's put it to the test. We're going to apply this psychological lens to our big economic question. We'll look at the actual global data on poverty and see how this one bias can lead to those two totally different conclusions we started with.
So here we go. Here's that first perspective, summarizing the anti-capitalist argument. The claim is that globalization has actually made things worse, that it has increased the number of people in extreme poverty. It's a powerful narrative because, honestly, it feels kind of intuitive. It just makes sense that if the rich are getting richer, then someone else must be getting poorer, right?
But then, you see a chart like this. This shows the percentage of people on Earth living in extreme poverty going all the way back to 1820. And that trend isn't just going down, it's a complete nosedive. It's a historic, dramatic plummet from a world where almost everyone was destitute to one where extreme poverty, thankfully, is becoming the exception, not the rule.
And just to put a number on it, in just the last few decades, more than 1 billion people have escaped that level of extreme poverty. 1 billion! So here's the million-dollar question. How can both of these things be happening? How can we have one story about rising poverty and at the same time, this data showing 1 billion people escaping it?
And the answer, the key to unlocking this whole puzzle, lies in understanding the difference between two concepts that sound similar but are worlds apart. Absolute poverty, that's about not having enough to survive, and relative inequality, which is all about the size of the gap between the richest and the poorest. And this chart tells the whole story perfectly. Just look at that orange line. That's absolute poverty, and it's basically falling off a cliff. Now look at the blue line. That represents global inequality. It stayed pretty high, right? This is where confirmation bias kicks in. If you're ideologically driven, you can choose to focus only on that blue line, see that persistent gap, and conclude the whole system is a failure, while completely ignoring or explaining away the incredible progress you see in that orange line.
Okay, so what does all this mean? This one example actually points to something much, much bigger than just an argument about economics. What we're really seeing is a fundamental clash between two different ways of trying to understand the world, the path of scientific rigor versus the path of ideological bias.
On the left, you've got what's called the dogmatic approach. You start with the answer you want, and then you work backward, cherry-picking all the data that proves you're right. But on the right, you have the critical, or scientific approach. You start with the question, you test your ideas against all the evidence, even the stuff you don't like. And, this is the most important part, you're willing to change your mind. And our source makes such a crucial point here. Look, nobody, especially in the social sciences, is pretending to be a perfectly objective robot. We all have values. But just admitting that you have biases doesn't give you a free pass to ignore reality. The whole goal of science isn't to find some perfect, bias-free truth, but to commit to a process that constantly challenges our own assumptions.
So, after all of that, what's the big takeaway for you? It's really not about deciding whether you're pro or anti-capitalism. It's about a personal challenge that applies to every single one of us, no matter what we believe. And that's the challenge of practicing a little intellectual humility.
So the source actually suggests these 3 virtues as a kind of antidote to our own biases. First, intellectual humility. Just the simple but really powerful act of admitting, hey, I could be wrong about this. Second, intellectual courage. That means having the guts to actually go looking for arguments and evidence that contradict what you think. And finally, methodological rigor, demanding that any claim, especially your own, is backed up by solid, transparent evidence.
And that really brings us to our final thought. You know, it is incredibly easy to spot confirmation bias in other people, especially people we disagree with. The real test, the hard part, is finding it in ourselves. So as you finish up with this, just think about what we've talked about, and maybe ask yourself, which one of my own deeply held beliefs might just need a second look?